Thank you for the introduction. I am so excited to be here today at Strategy Fest to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, strategy. And now, I know you didn't ask, but in my spare time, I'm also a bit of an art lover. Much to my parents' dismay, I actually studied art history alongside business in university. And what has always surprised and delighted me is how many valuable life lessons can be derived from studying art. Believe it or not, some of these lessons can even be applied to business strategy and execution. You see, as strategists, we like to create, to plan. We're the ideators, the visionaries, the problem solvers. But what we often are not are executors. Executing is usually left to sales teams, HR, IT departments, third-party agencies, which makes it that much more difficult to see our strategies through to results. But unlike us, artists are both master visionaries and professional executors. They must carefully consider execution while they simultaneously build their strategy. Because without strategy and vision, their work is trivial. But without execution, they're left with a blank canvas, which in our world, I guess you could liken to a PowerPoint deck with way too many graphs and buzzwords. Today at Strategy Fest, you've seen some magic, you've seen some dancing, you've heard some music, but it simply wouldn't be a festival without art. So, without further ado, let's dive into today's art history lesson. Starting with a classic, the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was already a known genius in the art world by the time he was asked by Pope Julius II to paint the Sistine Chapel. But being a sculptor by trade, he was not an expert of execution of this kind. In fact, this was really the first thing he ever painted. So he asked his painter friends from Florence to come visit him in Rome so he could understand their techniques. He spent weeks on the scaffold alongside them, watching them reproduce his drawings and paint on the ceiling, allowing him to grasp their technique strengths, but also their limitations, and derived a strategy in consequence. He was able to take those learnings and layer in his multidimensional techniques he had as a sculptor to create the first ever masterpiece that used perspective and 3D to draw the viewer into the world he had created. Which brings me to our first lesson in execution. Get on the scaffold. As we develop strategy, we spend a lot of time focusing on getting into the consumer's head, rooting our strategies in human insights. But the same needs to be true for the executor. We need to get deeply familiar with their day-to-day. What are their processes? What do their priorities look like? What are their pain points? What do they enjoy doing? While this may not influence what the strategy is, because once again, that should be rooted in consumer insights, it will certainly influence how we position it, roll it out, and execute it. And by baking these learnings into your strategy early on, you will avoid many hiccups down the road. For me, this has looked like going into stores with some of our reps and experiencing firsthand the painstaking and long task of putting together some of our wild point of sale displays. Or sitting in on a sales call with an account manager as he tries to negotiate listing all our innovation and hears no for the 64th time because margin is simply too thin. While Michelangelo sought insight to begin his project, after his friends went back home, he took some liberties to do things his way and made an original mixture of plaster and paint to get the exact effect he wanted. But this ended up being a huge mistake as the mixture combined with damp weather created mold. Now, if you've ever seen the Sistine Chapel, you know how big it is. At this point, he was already through painting 1/3 of the ceiling. Can you imagine? Which brings us to our second learning. Hire an in-house bubble burster. Someone who has a deep expertise in execution that you can consult with regularly to bounce off ideas. Someone who could have prevented Michelangelo from making that moldy mistake. I call it this because dream crusher sounded a bit harsh, but that's essentially what this person needs to do. It's often the role I play when we try to marry marketing strategy to sales strategy and execution. Ideally, this is someone who's pragmatic, but open-minded and creative. Someone who can help you find what we call the third way at an impasse. Not the way you want it done or the way it's being done, but the way it can be done. Next up, we have the infamous Andy Warhol. In 1962, Warhol was not yet the renowned artist he is today. He held his first solo exhibit and created the 32 paintings of his now iconic Campbell Soup Cans. It was commentary on how mass production and consumerism had come to dominate so much of American life and culture. And also, fun fact, an ode to his daily lunch for the last 20 years. The cans were presented on 32 separate canvases, each depicting a different kind of soup. The intention was to sell each piece individually for $100, and he displayed them in a single horizontal line supported by a shallow white shelf, as if they were still in a food store. Brilliant, right? Wrong. By the end of the show, there were only 5 takers, mostly friends. The show was a flop, but at this point, Irving Bloom, the show's gallerist, had grown to like seeing them all together and started to think they worked better as an overall piece rather than single units. So he then convinced Warhol that the work should be reconceived as one entity featuring 32 canvases. Warhol agreed, and they embarked on the painstaking task of buying back the 5 pieces. This made Bloom a co-creator of one of the 20th century's most famous artworks. Warhol's Campbell Soup Can, in its full entity, became the work that launched him into stardom and is largely considered a defining piece of the pop art movement. Not to mention that several years later, that piece eventually sold for $15 million. There are 2 learnings to be retained here. The first is that co-creating with your stakeholders can and will lead to better results. By identifying key stakeholders within your company that will play a role in your strategy's eventual execution, you can avoid some serious oversights. For major projects, build yourself a task force or a mini board of directors for your strategy. Select a champion per department, someone credible and respected, that will help you build and eventually advocate for your strategy. I promise you, this will avoid headaches down the line. And you don't have to limit this within the 4 walls of your organization. In fact, one of the most successful ways I've secured collaborative execution on major strategies in the past is by including key customers, which in my case is national retailers, in their development from the beginning. By having a seat at the table and feeling heard, they are engaged in our strategy and willing to execute with excellence. The second learning from this piece is that you need to know when to pivot. Sometimes even the most brilliant strategies and concept fail in execution. And as strategists, we can't be attached. Sometimes we need to cut our losses, buy back the 5 paintings while we still can, and pivot to reveal the masterpiece. Early on in my career, I learned this the hard way. As a salesperson, I was tasked to sell in a 25% cost increase to my customer. The brand was struggling to be profitable, and this strategy leveraged the number 1 position in the market to price it more premium. My customer, a major retailer who prides itself on low prices and is not known to take too kindly to cost increases, shut it down immediately. I persisted. No matter the beautiful story I told or the data I showed to support this, the buyer refused to believe it, claiming consumers wouldn't adjust to the new strategy, and thus we did not see execution. He begged us to take a downsize on our product rather than adjust costing, claiming it to be the lesser of 2 evils. I persisted. This went on for a year. For a year, this was the primary topic of discussion and subsequent tension. Until finally, he gave in and executed half-heartedly. The results were poor, he was proven right. 6 months later, we were forced to downsize. It's expected to face resistance to bold changes in strategy. But there is an art in knowing when to push back and when to give in. Had we just pivoted when we saw how serious these objections were, we would have saved ourselves a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of gray hairs. The last piece we'll look at today is by Yayoi Kusama, one of the most popular living contemporary artists in the world today. Over the past 7 decades, she's created paintings, sculptures, drawings, film, as well as performance, fashion, design, literature, and immersive installations such as the one we have here. This piece is entitled Obliteration Room. It consists of a completely white space, fully furnished with entirely white furniture. Upon arrival, visitors are handed a sticker sheet of colorful dots with which to leave their mark on this stark interior, which slowly becomes a riot of color. The vision was to have the room reflect Kusama's obsession with accumulation, obliteration, and becoming one with the artwork. Our first lesson from this piece is to break strategy and vision down into smaller, dot-sized, measurable targets. Had Sama handed a giant roll of stickers to attendees and simply said that the goal was to cover every single inch of the room in dots, public reception would have been very different. The task would have felt daunting and confusing. Instead, she chose to give them one sheet of 5 stickers. The manageable size and clarity of their role allowed for the executor to feel engaged in the process. What's more is that the autonomy of being able to place the dots wherever they wish allowed them to individualize their experience. Participants left feeling like they did their part in contributing to the larger goal, and that they did it their way. When you deploy a strategy to your executional team, you must be clear about what you're asking of them. We've all heard about SMART goals. Your ask needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And these targets need to be assigned at the lowest level possible, whether that is to an individual or a team, always considering the context that they're operating in. Once you've communicated the what, while I always recommend giving guidance on the how, I think it's important to give room to your executors to own their role in the strategy and make it theirs. After all, much like you're an expert of your craft, strategizing, they're an expert of theirs, executing. Giving them this leeway to personalize their approach will often unlock ways of reaching their targets that you didn't even know existed. Which leads me to our second learning from the obliteration room. Make your executor the artist. In this piece, Sama hands over all control to participants, empowering them to execute the piece and making them, for a brief moment, the artist. Once your strategy has been deployed, treat it as if it's no longer yours, but your execution team's. Certainly, this is important for accountability, but I would argue it's even more critical for ownership and pride. Your executor is now the hero of the strategy, and it's time for you to take a back seat. Now, that's not to say you won't have to do some backseat driving from time to time, but the road is now theirs. While Sama was tackling a serious subject with this piece, she did manage to tackle it in a fun and colorful way. She knew that for the audience to want to engage with it, she had to make it exciting. So, as you think about engaging your execution team around targets, remember that measuring doesn't have to only be leveraged for tracking towards a larger goal. It can and should be used to celebrate execution. Celebrate creativity and major wins. Make it fun. Host a contest. Make it a competition. Showcase the best executions at town halls. Give out awards, prizes, trips to the Bahamas. This may seem more or less obvious depending on who your groups of executors are, but trust me when I say this goes a long way towards getting the engagement from your teams. So, to recap what we've learned from the grades today. First, get on the scaffold. Get intimate with the reality of execution in your field. Have an in-house bubble burster. Bring someone on who can remind you of that operational reality every step of the way. Co-creating can and will lead to better results. Involve stakeholders in execution early on in your strategy development. Know when to pivot. Don't be attached to your plan if you realize in execution that it's not working. Break it down into dot-sized target. Executing strategy and achieving your vision will be the sum of many small parts. Know what those are and ask for them. And lastly, make your executors the artist. Set your guardrails for execution and let them do what they do best. And don't forget to make it exciting. The artist in me hopes that next time you go to a museum, you take a deeper look and appreciate what insights the work might have to offer you. But the business person in me just hopes that next time you work on developing your strategy, you feel a little bit more excited and equipped to tackle its execution. And with that, I'll leave you with words from none other than Andy Warhol himself. Being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. Making money is art, and working is art, and good business is the best art. So go forth, pick up your paintbrush, and create your masterpiece. Thank you.